Do we have Barbara here?
No.
Not
Oh, really?
if she shows up,
Because it's her questions that we've got.
ready?
Yeah.
Great. Lauren?
Well, welcome aboard. Sorry it took us a little longer to get started. As you can tell, we had to rearrange the library in here and get the cameras reset. No, I'm
Hard
teasing.
work.
No, actually, because the room we're in is it's in the process of getting repaired and restored. Some things were moved around and we had to restore the studio aspect of this room so that we could function effectively. But anyhow, that's why we're running a little late, but we're glad that we are here and we're glad that you're here as well with us. Let's start by talking to God. Do you want to lead us or do you want me to?
It's fine with me.
Go.
Avinu Malchinu, our Father and our King, we thank you that you've brought us to this day. We thank you that we can study your word and learn more about you and how you're working in the world. Help us to get as much out of your word today as we do from all the other things that we work on today. And thank you for how gracious and patient you are with us. B'Shem Yeshua Meshechenu, in the name of Yeshua, our Messiah. Amen.
Amen. Okay, and that means we are ready to roll. As we get underway, I was going to ask Barbara because she's been sort of our record keeper, but I'm going to ask Jessica, if you remember when we were talking about the deity of the Messiah, the deity of Yeshua, did we look at either the text in Isaiah or Jeremiah, or did we just focus on the Gospels?
I think there was just a focus on the gospel. I think we've mentioned it before in other episodes.
Okay.
Is it the writing on the clouds of glory?
No.
No?
No. This is something else. Okay, that's how I remembered it. So thank you for that input. Then what I'd like to do is put sort of an epilogue on our discussion from last week, from 2 weeks ago. The question was, the topic was if Yeshua is actually God, and we dealt with some of the passages in the Gospels and Yeshua's statements about himself related to that. But I realized afterwards that we did not look at any of the predictive texts that might enlighten us or lay the groundwork for that kind of an expectation of the Messiah. I will also mention that I'm trying to think of what his name is. Is it Boyarin? Daniel Boyarin? The book is the Jewish Gospels, and as a Jewish scholar, he, among other things, laid out the case for the Jewishness of Yeshua, but he also dealt with a couple of the expectations about the Messiah toward the end of the Second Temple period. And as part of it, he points out that there was an expectation, or it would not have been surprising for a claim for the deity of the Messiah, and therefore the deity of Yeshua, that would have fit well in the culture, the context of the Judaism of the Second Temple period. I don't know if in that book he dealt with anything from the Dead Sea Scrolls. There's a Dead Sea Scroll. It's not really a scroll because it's more like a pillar, about 3 or 4 feet high, called Hazan Gavriel.
Wait, hang on there. So it's not written on papyrus, it's written on a stone. So it's carved into the
It looked
stone.
more like a pillar, yes.
Oh, I didn't even
And
know about this.
yes, and Hazan, and that was discovered, maybe I'm thinking, all right, I'm going to say 10, 12 years ago, but given that we've had the disorientation of COVID and everything else,
Could be like 20 years ago.
could be longer ago, but I don't think it was quite that long ago. But anyhow, the point is, Hazan Gavriel added to our understanding of some of the expectations concerning the Messiah that were current in the time of Yeshua and in the late Second Temple period. And the interesting thing about Hazan Gavriel is that it expects a Messiah who would suffer and who, I'm trying to think, who would suffer and die, or just mention the suffering of the Messiah along the lines of the rabbinic concept of Messiah, son of Joseph, who would be a suffering and a dying Messiah. So that's another element that goes into the expectations of this particular time period. So you've got some of the stuff that I think it is Boyarin in Jewish Gospels points out that an expectation of a supernatural or divine Messiah would not have been out of place in the Second Temple period. And then you've got this particular reinforcement of the understanding that this special Messiah, in fact, would suffer and, in fact, die. To that, I wanted to add just a couple passages of scripture. We could spend a lot of time on this. I didn't want to spend a lot of time just to mention two key texts. Let's see. And they're very similar. The text in Jeremiah 23, and I'm going to give you the exact numbers in just a moment. And then there's one in Jeremiah 33. Jeremiah 23 is verses 5 and 6. And Jeremiah 33 is verses 15 and 16. And in both cases, he says, in those days and at that time, I will make a righteous branch sprout from David's line. Branch had become a descriptor of the Messiah. Obviously from David's line. Let's see if they both say the same, but close to that. And in Jeremiah 23, it says, in a king who will reign wisely and do what is just and right. In his days, Judah will be saved. Israel will live in safety. And this is the name by which he will be called, the Lord our righteousness. And Jeremiah 33 says almost exactly the same thing. It substitutes one clause that's a little different from what we have there. His name will be the Lord our righteousness. And we sometimes sing it, Adonai Tzidkenu. And it's Adonai in the sense of Adonai being substituted for the tetragrammaton, the special name, the unpronounced name of God that is clearly distinctively his. And so Messiah is given the name of God. Yod He Vav He. All right, that's one of the texts that's part of the predictive background. The other one I wanted to look at is the Haftarah from, I'm guessing, 3 weeks ago. The Haftarah at that time was Isaiah 6, and then also added to it, almost as an appendix, is Isaiah 9, 5 and 6 in the Jewish numbering, 6 and 7, yes, in non-Jewish texts. And you'll recognize the verses. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called, and now come a whole string of titles. And if you look at this more carefully, they are pairs of names, not always translated that way. So I will get a little more literal as we go through this. His names will be called Counselor of Wonders, God of Might, Father of Eternity, Prince of Peace. All of those are striking names and striking titles. But please note, God of Might, Father of Eternity are two of those names. So you get, how should I put it, an anticipation of the Messiah being a divine Messiah. And in fact, the Midrash on Lamentations, and I wish I could give you the exact reference or address for that. As it talks about the various titles of the Messiah, it mentions that these are the titles of the Messiah, and it lists branch, it lists a number of others, and then it also lists God of might and Father of eternity. So that was some of the background into which the whole conversation that we read about in the Gospels, that's part of the background in which it takes place. So when Yeshua makes these rather astounding claims for himself, while they are truly that astounding, they are not, how should we put it, outside the boundaries of Jewish expectation or understandings at that time. May not have been the mainstream, but it was all part of the package. So that's sort of an epilogue to what we talked about a couple of weeks ago, and I think it sort of completes the picture. Okay, shall we dive into?
Well, you're pointing at something that's so small, I can't read it. Okay, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, okay. We got several questions that were sent in, and they were all sent in by one person. So the rest of you need to do your homework and get questions in here. It begins by saying, Dr. Patrice began telling us about her lecture at the conference in January. She got through the first three. The crowds accepted Yeshua. Not all Pharisees hated Yeshua. And Jews believe salvation comes through good works.
I don't think we got through that one.
I don't know that we got, I remember reading part of the Siddur for it.
Right, but that's really all. I mean, this is all
Yeah.
crammed in at
Yeah.
the end.
She said, I'd love for you to continue the discussion. So I'm assuming the rest of the questions, but then she says that, and then she raises a couple more questions. But I did want to put a bit of a PS to the Pharisees business. And this is because I only remembered this particular incident in the book of Acts because I was teaching it as part of the class on Thursday. And I thought, oh, we didn't talk about this. There are two, I think, critical to the Pharisees related texts, or critical to our discussion concerning the Pharisees related texts in the book of Acts. Acts chapter 15, the setting for what is often called the Jerusalem Council. The question that was being asked is, what is required of Gentiles who became part of the Messianic Jewish community? What was required of them by way of behavioral norms? And the council had a lengthy discussion, and they put together their recommendation and sent a letter out regarding that. That whole discussion and the importance of that, you can read all about in Patrice's chapter in the Enduring Paradox. It's called Modern Day God-Fearers. But the first part of the chapter is what caught my eye given our discussion from several weeks ago. It says that they're talking now about the believers. In fact, let me not just quote it for you, let me read it for you.
15, what?
Acts 15, if I remember right, is verse 5.
Okay, yeah.
And this is why the question arises. Then some of the believers, who belong to the party of the Pharisees. So there's a group of believers who are Pharisees, who's expressly described as Pharisees. They stood up and said, they're giving their opinion, that the Gentiles must be circumcised and required to follow the Torah. So that's what led off in the discussion, but they were apparently of significant stature and of significant numbers to have prompted this very significant discussion in Acts chapter 15. So Pharisees were definitely part of the followers of Yeshua. Then in Acts chapter 21, Rav Shaul is back in Jerusalem, and he is, I was gonna say he bumped into James, Yeshua's brother, Yaakov. That's not exactly what happened, but we had this conversation before Rav Shaul's arrest. Some of the letters in address and arrest are the same. That was close enough.
Sure.
All right. Verse 20, Yaakov speaking to Rav Shaul. You see, brother, how many thousands of Jews believed, and all are zealous for the Torah. Okay. Literally, this is structured in such a way that the term that's used here is tens of thousands, and that I don't know if we talked about those numbers in our discussion about Jewish people having accepted Yeshua, but tens of thousands, and the structure is such that what's being implied here is a minimum of 30,000. Did we talk about them?
A little bit, yeah,
Okay.
we did.
So
Yes.
here's those numbers. So
No, go ahead, and then I'm gonna say there's another viewpoint on that. You tend to add more and more people, and that is not a,
you mean to population of Jerusalem?
yeah,
Yeah. But the point here is that in Jerusalem, there were at least 30,000 Jewish followers of Yeshua who were described as zealous for the Torah. Now, what party among, or what group among the Jews of that time would have been known to have been zealous for the Torah?
don't say zealots, that's not.
Thank you. I wouldn't
Yeah,
even,
don't say zealots,
although actually the zealots were very,
they weren't that bad about it.
No, they
but
were
it's
they
not
were-
what they're known for.
they were observant Jews, but they were not known for being zealous for the Torah.
And observant Jews during Second Temple Judaism is possibly makes them incredibly distinct. However, they're in a place where Jewish laws were followed more or less all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that people see things that way, especially with the early believers. They assume that, they were eating ham sandwiches and because they gotten rid of all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I would not want to leave that impression. That
No.
just like when you go to Israel today, it follows Jewish customs and rules a lot more closely than America could ever hope to. Would you say?
Yeah.
Because there's just the ethos, the way of life that is carried on in Israel is much more conducive to keeping Shabbat,
Being
more conducive to not eating unclean animals. I mean, it's you can do all these things, but you have to really put yourself out there and search for them. But if you're just living your life or your family, it's just not hard to keep a lot of these rules that seem to be so hard for us.
It's part of the context, especially in Jerusalem.
Yeah,
as we
yes.
discovered when we were.
Well, any place that has more of an Orthodox
Yeah.
population is part of it.
All right, so zealous for the Torah. If you think I might be reading a little too much into that, let me remind you of what the rabbi says. I was going to say in Philippians 2, but it might be in Galatians. No, I think it is Galatians chapter 1. He describes his own background and he describes his connection with the Pharisees. And he said, and I quote, I was more zealous for the Torah than they are. So that descriptor is a descriptor that goes along with the Pharisees. So, so much for Pharisees, and here tens of thousands of them who were followers of Yeshua. So, as we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, the crowds recognized Yeshua as the Messiah. So that's all I wanted to do by way of piggybacking on what we talked about the last time, by way of epilogue or postscript or whatever. Now, then comes her questions that she's added.
Want to do those before you get started? That's okay. Go ahead.
Before what?
Before we start back on.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I think so. Are there instances in the Tanakh where demons are cast out? Or did that only occur in Yeshua's time? Are there any rabbinic sources for this? I know David was able to ease Saul and his demons, that is King Saul, but did he actually cast them out? And then, totally unrelated to that, what do we know about the millennial reign and what it will look like? All right, so let's deal with the first of those.
Please do.
Oh, I was good. I'm turning to you, Izar.
No,
No?
no.
All right, will you at least deal with Saul?
Well, you get started. I
Okay.
mean, do
All
we
right.
have any places that,
All right.
that you can think of that you have demonic possession in the Tanakh?
All right, I can't think of any that are expressly described as situations where people were described as interacting with demons.
It just isn't described. If there are places that it's not described.
No.
Like that.
So we do read about it taking place during the Second Temple period, and it didn't just take place in Yeshua's ministry. There were instances, and I can't tell you how numerous they were, but there were definitely multiple instances that are found in the literature of the Second Temple period that describe the fact that that religious Jews of this particular time period, there were some or groups that were involved in actually exorcising or casting out demons. One of the groups that is perhaps more closely associated with this is a group that is called the Hasidim. Not the Hasidim of today, nor the Hasidim of who were the allies of the Maccabees during Hanukkah, but a different group. And in case you weren't aware of the fact, there were a group, a strong part of the of those who joined with the Maccabees in pushing back against Syria and the desecration of the temple. There was a large number of people who were called pious or observant or devout Jews, and they were just often described as Hasidim because the term Hasid has to do with being devout or pious. It's quite possible that, quite likely that the Pharisees and the Essenes may have derived from this particular group shortly after the restoration of the temple. Yes.
So I'm asking you a question. So would this be because that there was more of an emphasis put on Satan the later we get in Jewish history? Did that come up during Second Temple period because that was a hot topic or a newly developing topic? Is that part of
That's a
change between Older and New Testaments?
that's a good question, and it's quite likely that that was the case.
Okay.
But there were definitely groups. There were definitely people who were involved in what we would call exorcism, and the Hasidim who are now in this late Second Temple period, the time of Yeshua, mainly in the area of the Galilee, were at least loosely connected to the Pharisees, and they were known, among other things, as miracle workers. You, in your beginning Hebrew class, read the story about one of them, the circle
Yeah,
dweller.
Choni,
Choni
the circle maker.
Choni was just one of the Hasidim of the Galilee. There were others, and part of what we learn about them is that they were involved in exorcising demons, casting out demons.
Okay, so we do know that
Yeah.
some of these holy guys that were going around during Yeshua's time
Yeah.
were doing it. Okay,
Um,
that would be in Talmudic materials. How would you find that out?
I don't remember in what the sources are for that. This would be in historical research that has been done more recently, going back into the historical material at that time and reading some of the documents there.
Mhm.
You will see it reflected in some of the conversations Yeshua had in the Gospels, where he refers to the fact that he casts out demons, and then he compares that with those among them who cast out demons. So that means there were those among them who were casting out demons. By this time in the Second Temple period, one of the expectations, and I alluded to it again in the class Thursday, is that there were certain specific messianic miracles that were going to be signs that if one person performed these three sets of miracles, then that was a good indicator that they were the Messiah. One of those is the resurrection of the dead. One of those is the healing from what had been called in earlier English leprosy, healing from leprosy. And you might say, well, what's the big deal about that? Because in those days, leprosy was basically a death sentence. So it's somewhat akin to bringing a person back from the dead. And then one of the signs that was, one of the miracles that was expected and was considered a messianic sign was casting out a demon or demons from someone who was a deaf mute. Now, that means that at that time there were expectations, and there were in fact instances of people who cast out demons. But what made the casting out of a demon from a person who's deaf and mute so striking or so messianic? Because the process that is usually used, or was usually used at that time for casting out demons, was to find a way to get the demon to identify themselves or themselves by name, and then calling them out by name. All right? Think about a deaf mute. If you ask that person to name themselves, guess what?
They don't have any way of.
They can't hear you, and they can't express it. So the rabbis reasoned that it would require, and in fact, I think this may have been an analogy or metaphor they used, a Messiah would be able to do this because he had a special sense.
Knowledge of spiritual.
Knowledge of spiritual, but what they used as the metaphor was he could sniff them out literally.
Well, Yeshua shows that, because when he's dealing with a guy who at the end of the story is the demons go into a pig who then jumps over into the sea of Galilee.
Pigs in space.
And exactly, pigs in space. But in that incident, I haven't looked at it in a while, but in that incident, he seems to know better than other people how to deal with these.
Yeah, but the main point is that the spiritual sense that even though you couldn't command the demon to address you because the person couldn't speak, let alone could hear the command, it would require a special sense or sniffing out by the Messiah to be able to know the name of the demon and be able to call the demon out and exorcise the demon from the specific person. So, so that's to let you know that certainly by the time of Yeshua, it was not uncommon. I wouldn't say it was common necessarily, but it was not uncommon for exorcism or demons being cast out.
And we're not shown any scenario like this in the Tanakh at all.
No.
We're just not.
No.
We have King Saul, but that's different from what you're seeing then in the Gospels.
Yeah. Is there anything more to say about that from Second Temple period? So certainly post Tanakh, but pre-Newer Testament, this was going on, and it's found in the writings and in the historical records of that they describe some of these people. Now, how would you, and this popped in my mind largely because of the second part of this question, David and Saul. This is a Saul and Samuel story.
You mean the Witch of Endor?
Exactly. Since that is part of the package, did you have any insights into that? And since it's somewhat related to this, I don't know that we can say it's directly related.
Well, it has to do with spiritual beings that are not good guys.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think that is a reflection of what we already know about Saul, which is that he's very troubled as a person.
Mhm.
He has a spiritual problem. It isn't just he has I don't know, he's paranoid. That is, we have these adjudications that they didn't have back then, but he's troubled, and he would he would swing back and forth. He'd be fine sometimes, and then you'd see him, and there would be this swinging back and forth. And toward the end of his life, it seems as though it's all negative, that he's exhibiting all negative things. So he wants to know if he's going to win the battle.
Mhm.
First of all, a short thing. So Saul is up in the Galilee, and he is there because the Philistines.
Be right back. Keep going.
Okay, all right, bye. Be sure to write. The Philistines are attempting to cut the people of Israel in two, and by doing that, they can divide and conquer. And so Saul leaves his palace and goes north, and he's up at the on the edge of the plain of Megiddo, and he wants to know if he's going to win the battle. And does he go? He's not near the tabernacle. He's not down in Jerusalem or in his home territory. He's a stranger where he is. And so for some reason, he decides, he heard about a woman who was called a witch. I don't know how good that translation is, but evidently she has some spiritual power, and he goes to see her. And what's interesting is we studied this story very closely when I was taking a course about cults.
Mhm.
It was called Sects and Cults, not Sex and Cults. It was called Sects and Cults, and a very unfortunate name of the course. They probably changed it, but we looked at it, and what the professor was talking about to us then, he said this. He said he calls for Samuel to be brought back because he remembers getting good advice from Samuel, but Samuel's no longer with us. So he calls for Samuel, and I guess she calls for Samuel,
Mhm.
and Samuel appears, and the woman is more blown away than
Than
Saul.
Yeah.
And he does in fact say that Saul is not going to retain his kingdom, that he's not going to win the battle, that it's going to be a terrible defeat. The professor said, we have no way to ascertain whether this was actually Saul or Samuel, or if it was some other spiritual entity. We don't know. Here's what we know. The woman who did this, and she was supposedly an expert or someone you would go to for help in this, she is more surprised
Mhm.
than his. So does that mean that we can say, well, we can call for dead people that we know are very godly and that they'll appear and give us advice? And I would say, please run away from that. Please don't go there, man. And our professor said it very well was somebody pretending to be Samuel, but that it was clear because of Samuel's life in the past several years that he was going to not only Saul had already lost the kingdom for himself, then he lost the kingdom on behalf of his family, and soon the whole kingdom is going to be taken away as a result of Saul's decisions and what happens to Saul. That's why after the battle is fought, Saul and Jonathan are killed, among others. David does not then say, okay, I'm the king now. I just got word, I'm the king. I'm going to change all the decorations in the throne room. I'm going to have it now. We're here because the people reading it know that David is already been ordained to be king. That's not what happens at all. David does not claim anything for his own self. In fact, it takes him. He feels that that's just the beginning of, David feels it's just the beginning of his work, which is to get the hearts and the minds of the Jewish people toward him. And it takes him 7 years to gather up and get the support of the different tribes. I just thought I would add that because people have a very truncated idea of what happened next. So when you can't say that Saul killed himself, he had the messenger kill him. And you can argue about that, but I don't think it's worth arguing about. The result is there, but it really took a long time after that. The kingdom was very, very at odd. They were, what do I want to say? They were left going, what? And who's in charge? And now what do we do? And the Philistines are coming and they're going to, create this terrible division between the north and the south. It is a desperate time. And it could well be that God said that desperate times call for desperate measures. Therefore, I'm going to have someone come and visit Saul. It won't be Samuel himself, because we have no kind of theology that says, yeah, you can go and visit after you're dead. You can come and visit people when they want your advice. That doesn't happen. So is that at all helpful? I'm not sure, but it doesn't say that it's a demon. No. And it doesn't say that there are demons to call on. And it does not say anything about what the woman normally does in these situations. Yeah.
But the striking thing is she was shocked by what occurred.
She wasn't not expecting Samuel to come.
And the message that Saul got, if I remember right, basically Samuel chewed him out for even calling for him.
And that wouldn't be the first time that Samuel had to, have a discussion with him about this. These are not things we do. It seems like Saul just couldn't get it together for whatever reason. He was a damaged person. And when God chose him, it may have appeared that he could be worked with, but as it turned out, as he lived his life, he made the wrong choice so many times that after a while, God said, I can't work with him. And that's when Samuel says, don't come to see me anymore, because you've disobeyed what God wanted over and over again.
All right. I know David was able to ease Saul and his demons, but did he actually cast them out? My question would be, did David ease Saul's demons, or did he ease Saul's demons?
I'm failed to see the difference.
I'm trying to get there. We often talk about people who have troubles as having demons, not in the sense of creatures, but in the sense of issues or problems in their life. And I'm not sure, in reading that David and Saul's, that set of David and Saul stories, which kind of demons Saul had. Were they the actual spiritual forces, evil spiritual forces, or were they, as you very nicely described just now, were they just indicators of a troubled person, and David's harp playing and or singing was able to quiet the troubles that were stirring in Saul?
Mhm.
And I'm not sure the text is clear about it.
It's not clear. Well, I think the pattern of Saul's life is clear.
Yes.
I mean, you're not going to, certain things you have to take a step back from the story of his life in general. You can't, we go through it detail by detail as it's in the scriptures, but when you take a step back and what was Saul like and what happened with Saul, and you try to summarize. From the get-go, he was an insecure person. And I think he himself did not feel that he was worthy of the trust that had been given him. One of my professors, I'll never forget, said the first time we see Saul, he's hiding. He's hiding among the baggage and the donkeys. He does not want to come out and be in charge. So right from the get-go, you can see that he's going to take work. It's going to be work. But what you and I also know from our experience is that demons really can only get a foothold inside a person if they already have an empty space there that will be able to be filled. In other words, if you are living according to God's instructions and according to what he wants you to be doing as far as you know, you're not gonna get demons. It's only people that already have a space, and the space represents something that's not settled in their inner person. And I think it's important to see that, because there's a lot of junk about, I almost use another word, there's a lot of junk about what demons can do and what demons can't do. And we could even have a further discussion about.
Or how common they are.
Yes, or do we have a different position about them in the newer covenant than we did in the older covenant times? But yeah, Saul, because he started out as not totally a healthy spiritual person, it doesn't seem. And so there was some space within him for demons to come in. And I think what David did was calm them down. That it's possible to, the person sometimes doesn't have a lot of control over the demonic if they have that problem in their life, but their situation can either make it worse or make it better. And I think David supplied what was needed for Saul to be better rather than to be
stilled and quieted.
Exactly. That doesn't mean he's going to be that way for, the rest of the week or the rest of the year. But David had that power through his music.
Yeah, and the text, if they were in fact spiritual beings as opposed to just a troubled personality, the text gives us no indication that David in any way cast them out or exorcised.
No, I think the word is he calmed them.
Yeah, I think so.
So that they weren't in control of Saul's life at that moment. So.
Okay. So, just, I think, sort of an important thought or caveat, and that is this: don't go looking for demons in others or around you or in you, because that's not the common thing. It's the uncommon thing for that to take place. Mm-hmm. And so we have I don't know if it's as frequent now as it was a couple decades ago, the tendency, if there's something wrong with a person, we need to cast the demon of such and such out of that person. Now, that person is just dealing with a problem they're having in their life because there's an issue of, what should we say, holding stuff back from God, living a lifestyle that is not in accord with God's guidelines. It's just areas of a person's life that they need to deal with and get sorted out with God. And the problem isn't there because there's a demon of such and such there that's causing this person to act this way. The person's acting this way because of the person who's acting that way. There's no need to identify a demon behind these things, because as human beings, there's enough evil in us, or the possibility of evil in us, that you don't need the demons for that to take place. I used to have have a quick sentence or two in dealing with this subject in the past, but it's been so long since they've even
Well,
addressed this subject.
In the late 60s, early 70s, there was a very popular comedian. His name was Flip Wilson. And one of the things he used to always go into was he was African American, and he pretended to be an older African American woman. And she said, and whenever she did something wrong, she'd go, "The devil made me do it." And so, and it was a joke, and everybody laughed. "The devil made me do it. You know, why did you do such a, the devil made me do it." And so that became, I think, a little too important for certain groups of believers, because Flip Wilson was making fun of people like that, because the devil doesn't have to make us do bad things. We have a good tendency on our own to do bad things as human beings. And some people are stronger at and less a problem from that urge than others. And so, I think we're flattering ourselves if we see demons everywhere. We don't need to have demons to cause us to not do what God wants us. It's because that really, what he was saying is, why don't you take the blame for yourself? You know, if you did something wrong, admit it yourself. Don't blame other people, but say, it's my fault.
Yeah, and Hasatan, Satan, the devil, however you want to describe him or identify him, doesn't need to have a whole lot of demons around to cause problems. We handle that pretty well ourselves as human beings.
Yeah. Let me say this about
Sure.
Dr. Kane. So when I was in seminary, one of my favorite professors was Dr. Kane. And he was a very conservative believer. He was educated at Moody Bible Institute. So he wasn't a wild and crazy guy theologically. In fact, he's the opposite. But he used to talk about when he served for 25 years in China before it became communist. This is before it became communist. And so his job, there was a group of them that lived together, and their job was to plant churches there. And of course, he had to leave once the communists took over. They kicked out all the missionaries. He was one of the last to leave. So he was under communism for a couple years before he finally left. Here's what he said. He said in their churches that they had, in China, that demon possession was a pretty common thing. And so I'm sitting there with everybody in the class, and we're going like, go on. He was very like, so I remember this story about this little boy, and was always disrupting the service. And so the church met and prayed with him, and there was conversations between what was controlling the little boy and what the elders of this congregation were doing. And meanwhile, us students were going like, what? Because he was openly talking about this in a class, and nobody openly talked about this kind of stuff in any class that you had, did they? And because he was such a down-to-earth person, and because we knew this was the opposite of what he would normally act like, that he was not making up things that he did not see. And he said it was more common. So it could be that different cultures have different issues as far as demonic power in that culture. But evidently it was a problem in China that they had to learn how to deal with, or he learned how to deal with it because he worked with the churches that were there. And I can't think of any church in America where they would, during the Sunday service, where they have an issue with this, and this would come up and they'd have to deal with it.
We did have some friends, and for a number of reasons, I'm not going to tell you, identify which of the islands in the Caribbean they were working with, where they actually encountered demonic forces and had to deal with them. And they were able to identify them because of some of the classic things that were going on that could not have been done by humans, but could only have been done by demonic forces. we ourselves, in some 50 years of ministry, have only encountered real demon possession twice in 50 years. So we've encountered people who've made all kinds of claims, but they did not bear up. But only on 2 occasions did we have any reputable encounters.
Well, I will say that individually, not in the situation you're talking about, but privately, as I was going about my business or wherever I was, at least twice, I felt like a person I was talking to, there was something deeply wrong with that person. Not that if you walk by and listen to us talking, that you would hear anything weird, but I just had a sense that that person
There's something
was
different.
like, I felt like this person cannot be worked with. They are not open, and you can't really help them except to just say, okay, have a good life, bye-bye, and not make friends or not attempt to minister to them, because it would have been out of my pay grade, kind of.
Okay, before we move on from that, any questions? Okay, then the reason I left the room momentarily is because there was one, because of part of what you said about that we did not thoroughly deal with the idea of Jewish people believing salvation comes through good deeds.
Oh, yeah, you want to.
Well, only because it occurred to me, because I shared this story last night in the Drash. It is something that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said. Yochanan ben Zakkai was a rabbi of the late 1st century. He may have, it's possible he could have overlapped with Yeshua. But largely due to Ben Zakkai, or Ben Zakkai was one of the people that helped make this possible, the reformation of Judaism apart from a temple, because of what he was able to do.
After the second temple was destroyed
After the second temple
in
was
70.
destroyed. Yeah.
Okay.
So that gives you a setting for the importance of Ben Zakkai. And in effect, he helped restore, I guess is a good term, the Sanhedrin. So there was a group that would continue to help guide Jewish people in their religious lives. But here's what Ben Zakkai said. If you've performed many mitzvot, in other words, a bunch of good deeds, do not think that you have any merit, that you're entitled to any sort of reward. Okay? That's the purpose for which you were created. It is not the means by which you have a relationship. If you have done many mitzvot, do not think you have any merit. That's what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai teaches. So,
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, so that's in keeping with the few things we did say a couple of weeks ago when we were dealing with the question of do Jews believe salvation comes through good deeds?
Yeah. Unfortunately, the reason why many Christians feel this is because that's the way Judaism has been presented. There's just very little enlightenment in Christian churches. I don't care what kind of Christian you are, whether you're Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant, whatever kind of Christian. The general story that Christians are given about the Jewish faith is that Jewish people believe that they can go to heaven by performing good deeds. And of course, we all know within our church that that's impossible. And so they are really, really wrong to believe this. And that's called a straw man argument or a straw person argument, which is you build up your own definition of what something is, and then you tear down what you've given as the definition, whether that definition is correct or not. And in the case of the church, this is what they've been taught. This is how they passed it along. And so it's very, very difficult to make any headway because They're so sure that they understand Judaism because their famous believer in that they love would never lead them astray and is a big expert on this topic. And it's just terrible. It really is terrible. And unfortunately, if they happen to talk to many Jewish people, like a neighbor or, I don't know, brother-in-law or somebody, oftentimes the Jewish person does not know how to explain their faith. And so they do fall into the trap of, well, I just try to do the best I can. And so if all the good things I've done are put on the scale and the good things are on one side of the scale, and the bad things are, hopefully the good things will win out and I will go to heaven. And that is also a failure within Judaism to explain to others how really they feel their relationship with God is attained. Is that fair enough to say? But it's almost impossible to try to get Christians to understand that what they think about Judaism couldn't be more wrong. And so we just try to keep quoting different places where it says, God is in a relationship with you because of grace. It's not because of what you do. And there's so many different types of times that God speaks that way or rabbis speak that way. But it's not told to Christians. And so therefore what they are trying to tear down does not exist. Does that make sense?
And what you just described reminded me that at Vicky's party 2 weeks ago.
Mhm.
2 weeks ago, I was having a conversation with somebody. We were at a birthday party celebration who was there along with us. And this particular person who grew up in a church expressed,
We had never met them.
we'd not met before, expressed the fact that his feeling was he didn't feel himself too religious at this point, but his feeling was exactly the way in which you described it. If I do the best that I can and do as much good as I can, then in the end that will be fine. This is a person who was brought up in the church, so the misunderstanding that Patrice described can occur regardless of what religious background you've come through.
Yeah.
Now let me get back to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and what you just said triggered that. In Ephesians 2:8 and 9, which is part of what I was dealing with in the Drash last night, it talks about salvation is by grace through faith. It's not of ourselves. It's a gift of God. Okay. Most people stop reading there. In verse 10, the rabbi, Ephesians 2:10, it's part of the discussion. It's part of the same paragraph. But for some reason, most people don't read it. It says, for we have been created in Yeshua the Messiah for good works. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, concerning mitzvot, this is the purpose for which you have been created. The words are identical to what Rav Shaul said in Ephesians 2:10. So if you want to accuse the Jewish people of believing in salvation through good deeds or good works, please remember Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who says exactly the same thing that Rav Shaul says in Ephesians 2:10. So if one is guilty of salvation by good works, so also is the other, but I've never heard Rav Shaul accused of that.
I've never heard him accused of that either.
Okay.
In fact, he's the only one they cling to. Let me just point out that the Christian church had to be reminded of that through Martin Luther. Because that was one of Martin Luther's things, we're saved through faith, because he felt that the Catholic Church was totally missing the mark, and that was in the 1500s. So this has been talked about at various times down through the centuries. It's not like, oh, it just happened once and then we took care of that. Nobody believes that anymore. No, evidently this is a human problem, and it doesn't matter what faith you come from, that you do not see that God is gracious to all of us. And it's important no matter who you are.
Yeah.
And God is gracious to Jewish people too.
We had the opportunity a couple of years ago to be in Wittenberg, which is where Martin Luther.
The city of Wittenberg
Yes.
in Germany.
Which is where Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses in the 1500s. And of course, Martin Luther became known as a proponent of the just, the people who are righteous, the people who are in right relationship with God will live by faith. But Luther's not the one who came up with that.
He just reminded people.
Yes, he ascribed it to Rav Shaul. But as I've just quoted for you, Rav Shaul is saying the same thing as Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And I think I shared this 2 weeks ago. Neither of those two rabbis came up with it. The rabbis of the Talmud, when they talk about the guidelines, instructions God has given to us, they counted that there were some 613 in the Tanakh. And then in this text, in the Talmud, written by the rabbis, by the Pharisees and their heirs, the section is Makot 23. In it, it says, they started with 613, so-and-so condensed it to 15, so-and-so condensed it to 10, so-and-so condensed it to 6, so-and-so condensed it to 3, and so-and-so condensed it to 2. And then along came Habakkuk and condensed it to 1. The just shall live by faith. That's in the Talmud because it's in Habakkuk. So just as sort of a...
Yeah, and let me also add something that really became clear to me. So one time, I was chatting with a woman who I really respected. She was a classmate of John's at seminary, and she was a missionary working in Bangladesh, and just had a wonderful ministry. And we were at some kind of get-together party, and where you eat munchies and you chat with each other. And she said, well, there's 2 ways to get to heaven. Either you have to obey all 613 rules, or you can depend on Yeshua's work. And I came home and I thought, no, that's not the way it is at all. But she had inadvertently fallen for this idea that if you do every single good deed you could possibly accomplish, that would be the only way to come to Yeshua without Yeshua. You wouldn't need Yeshua if that could happen, but that's impossible, as she said. And I'm thinking, she doesn't understand that the way you come to have a relationship with God within Judaism is not by following 613 rules. She was so unaware that that was not true. And I was, in my heart, I was really like crying. I was crying. If even someone like her can misunderstand what Judaism was there to do, I don't know how we're going to make any sense to people who are not as smart as she is. And so I think that
Or is educated.
Or is that, well, that's what I mean, smart and educated. And yet this is the way Christians often present Judaism. There was not another way of salvation. It's not possible to obey rules and then get to a relationship with God. That was never true. Whether Jewish people think it now or not, as with Christians, some people are better at understanding the theology, and some people have not been taught very much about their theology, and so they have straw men, or they just punt. They didn't make the play. They didn't get they were playing a football game. They didn't quite make, and so you have to punt now. And so the punting is, oh, I guess I'll give up and depend on God. That was never an option. It was always always depend on God. Not you can either do it that way or this. No 2 ways, just 1 way. And the rabbis will tell you that too.
Yeah.
Even to rabbis today will say that too.
Okay. Do we want to call it here, or do we want to address the last question she has?
Oh, well, we can, I don't have a lot to say about
Okay.
it. Do you have a lot to say?
No, because I'm not sure there's a lot that can be said about it.
Correct.
Okay, just a final postscript on the previous discussion, and that is when you're dealing with the mosaic material, it's often considered a law code, like the law codes of Hammurabi. In its historical context, it was not the material that is considered the mosaic material. It follows a pattern of an ancient treaty, covenant or treaty. And the ancient covenant or treaties, they go back to the time of, at least back to the time of the Hittites, which is just around the time of Moses. The covenant or treaty pattern was a nation entered into a relationship with a greater nation, and the emperor of that greater nation would in effect say, once this covenant treaty was established, these are all the things I've done for you. Now, because of what I've done for you, I expect you to be responsive to my governing. Law code was something of a different nature. If you want to summarize it in the classes, I hand out a chart on this with different things on one side or the other. Yeah. And in this, I think the best way to summarize it is, let me see if I want to just think something out here. Yeah, in the covenant or treaty, the emperor or the great king would say, yes, these are all things I've done for you. Now, because of what I've done for you, here's what I expect in return. Or because you now are my people, please act like my people. The line sort of summarizes the differences in a law code with the different guidelines or instructions you have. You've got to, or else. With a covenant or treaty, you get to because.
You want to,
Yes.
because.
Yeah. So in the one case, it's you've got to, in the other case, you get to, even though the material might look very similar. In the one case, you've got to if you're going to have a relationship. In the other case, you get to because you do already have a relationship, and now you want to live out that relationship. Or to get back to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, because this is the purpose for which you've been created. All right, now, what do we know about the millennial reign and what will it look like? I'm tempted to simply say, well, if you want to know more about it, read the book of Revelation towards the very end, or read Ezekiel chapter 40 to 48. And there's also some sections, I think, of Isaiah and some parts of Zechariah that might also impact this discussion as well.
It doesn't say a lot about the millennium,
Nope.
because if I understand this question, it's like when Yeshua returns to reign from Jerusalem, what will that look like? Just not told. We're not told. We're told all sorts of things that are going to happen, but that doesn't describe the millennial reign itself. Is that fair enough to say?
All right. Why is it?
You have to use your holy imagination.
Why is it called millennial? Because the term millennium relates to a 1,000-year period. And there is described at the end of the book of Revelation events that will occur after a specific 1,000-year period. And what happens is then there will be a new heavens and a new earth.
Okay, but see, from our teaching about new being renewed, I sort of think that they'll be renewed.
Yep.
It's not going to be, we're destroying one and create.
Exactly.
No, they'll be renewed, because that's what new really means with a lot of things. It's not the new covenant, it's the renewed covenant. It's not a new moon, it's a renewed moon. And I think the new heavens will be renewed back to the way they were intended, not there's going to be something so different. No, I think we pretty much would say the good parts. We'll keep the good parts and the chaff will blow away.
I'm going to get back to that in a minute, but I want to finish
Yes, I'm sorry.
with the concept of the millennium.
Yes.
The millennium is described as a 1,000-year reign, and in the book of Revelation, it indicates that this is the time when Yeshua as the Messiah will actively reign on earth in fulfillment of the promises God made to David. This is not just coming from the book of Revelation. It is in fact a Jewish concept that is hinted at least in the text of Ezekiel 40 to 48. It is also a Jewish understanding because there was a traditional Jewish understanding of the age of the earth. And again, this is not being literal. The age of the earth goes through seven periods. So the first 1,000 years, this happens, the next 1,000 years, this happens, and then the last, or the 7,000 years, or the 7th millennium is when the Messiah actually reigns on the earth. So there is some Jewish context to what's going on in Revelation. So that's hence the term millennium and the millennial reign. What Patrice said is again correct. The rabbis of old understood this time period that Isaiah describes at the end of his book as a renewed heavens and new earth, and so they call paradise Gan Eden. In other words, Garden of Eden. So they view it as a restoration to what was intended at the very beginning. So that's what Patrice is talking about there at the very end. So that too is a very highly Jewish concept. So yes, there was an expectation of a 1,000-year reign that Revelation specifically describes as 1,000 years. That's a very Jewish expectation of the Second Temple period. And I don't know how much earlier than that, but certainly by the time of the Second Temple period, that it would last 1,000 years.
I don't want to interrupt you.
But yeah, seriously, if you want to read more about the kinds of things that might be taking place at that time, the bulk of Ezekiel 40 to 49 deal with this time period. And the book of Revelation in its own way, and the book of Revelation is a specific style of literature, which is very distinct. But there were other, it's called apocalyptic literature. There was other apocalyptic literature in that time, in the time period, the late Second Temple period, that reflects some of the same kinds of concepts in Revelation. So you need to know about those materials if you're going to try to understand Revelation. You will need to understand Ezekiel 40 and following, and you'll need to understand some of these other texts. Daniel would be another one.
But because of the style of literature is apocalyptic by definition, you cannot take it literally.
Mhm.
It is a bunch of metaphors. And the interpretation of metaphors it changes through the centuries. Would you say that's fair to say?
Mhm. Yeah, it's done. It's images. They're how should I describe it? That are more cosmic kinds of images rather than earthly kind of images. Does that? Yeah.
Mhm.
So it's far more transcendent and broad than the way in which you would normally approach literature. So that's a bit of a warning on how you try to interpret the book of Revelation, but you'll get a feel for the kind of imagery of expectation of this time period. And yeah, I think you get some of that kind of, you get some of what we might call end times kind of imagery as well in Zechariah.
Oh, yeah, definitely Zechariah.
As well as in Daniel.
Mhm.
And I think if I'm correct, in Isaiah 26 to 29. But anyhow, so there you go. What's it going to look like? It will be the reign of Yeshua as king, centered in Jerusalem, over the entire world. And it appears that believers will have a part of that as, for lack of a better term, sub-regents. Yeah. And I'm trying to think of some of the texts that indicate that they may come from, it's been so long since I've looked at those texts. Some cases from 1st and 2nd Thessalonians and elsewhere in Rav Shaul's writings. Go ahead.
Something I don't think that is talked about in general, at least I don't remember it ever having been talked about, is when we say that Yeshua will rule the earth from Jerusalem, you made allusion to, well, what will this government look like and who will be involved in the government? I'd like to say, please do not blame me for this, because this took me a considerable amount of thought, but I think I'm right. The tribes will be in charge. That Yeshua will be in charge, but the cabinet will be the tribes, and they will rule. They will rule along with Yeshua. I think that is part of the reason why, when you just start to say that the Jewish people will be in charge, people get real weird and nervous and threatened, and oh, but God loves Gentiles just as much. Okay, but when it comes to, we say the Jewish people were chosen. What were they chosen to do? Is it just about getting to Yeshua and then afterwards they're not special anymore? Or is there something more to Jewish specialness that lasts on and on into history? And I think I would say, although I'm not willing to die on this line, I'm not willing to go to death for this belief, but I think that's who will be assisting Yeshua is the tribes, and they each have ministries that they will be in charge of. But I think that's what Hasatan, that's the end point where he says, I will not allow them to be in charge. They will not be in charge. We'll get rid of them and he'll have to pick other people. But I don't think he's going to be successful at that. Is that fair enough? Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah.
Because people never talk about it overtly, but I love Gentiles, and they're really, really great. However, as a ruling class, I think it's been very clear, and that's what the two brothers that fought over Yeshua, sitting by the right hand of Yeshua. Yeah. And the mother comes up and says, you got to sit them next to you. Well, she's describing something where they're ruling, and they're the part of the ministry. They're part of the cabinet. And who gets to be closer to Yeshua while he's ruling? And so to me, this is one of the big giant hints that was not wacky. That was, Mom understood the comeuppance of what was going to happen in the future when Yeshua came to rule. They just sort of skipped the part where he didn't get to rule right away. There's going to be several thousand years where he doesn't get to rule quite yet. But when he does, I think all that kind of thing will be fulfilled. I can only hope. Mm-hmm. No, people don't like to talk about that, but I think that's it. And also, when you talk about the 1,000-year reign, this is where the concept of the German Reichs come into being, these 1,000-year time periods that the German, the ruling class in Germany had decided that there was a first Reich in German history and the second Reich, and then under the Austro-Hungarian Empire, that was the third Reich. Reich meaning rule, and then the fourth Reich would be the rule that comes from Hitler, but looking forward to 1,000 years of rule. Like evidently they felt the past in German history had these 1,000-year reigns, and so I'm thinking they must have gotten this from the biblical text somehow.
Could be.
and, you know, laced it together, tied it up together with what they perceive German history to be. Because I don't think the Austro-Hungarian Empire lasted for 1,000 years. I could be wrong. It was more like 500, so.
Okay. And I mentioned earlier that there was this understanding within Judaism of sections of thousands of years, and then the last thousand, or the seventh, will be this time of the Messianic era, for another way to put this. Are any of you aware what year this is in the Jewish calendar?
I forgot already. We talked about it at New Year's, but at Rosh Hashanah, but
Have we reached the year even the year 6,000 in the Jewish calendar?
no.
No. No. Now that's. I don't want to pursue that any further, but just to let you know, even built into the Jewish calendar that we still follow, you've got that conception of these 1,000-year groupings, in which according to the Book of Revelation, in which the last 1,000 will be the Messianic era, and again, that's in keeping with Jewish expectations of those times.
I think it's difficult for Americans to perceive that length of time because we just think we're so old as a nation, but we really aren't compared to Europe and Asia. You know, the length of time we've been the United States is just a little drop in the bucket compared to, well, the German concept of Austro-Hungarian Empire being around for 500 plus years. And then you have the Turkish Empire, which was around for 600 years. I mean, so when we talk about, well, we're not even quite 2,000 years, not doing it. It's not, it just, we're not thinking about larger numbers. We're just thinking about America.
Yeah, we've been around less than 250 years.
Well, we lived in Illinois for a long time. And so when the bicentennial came, of course, Illinois celebrated the bicentennial. And so that's when Lincoln became really, really important. Because Lincoln was as far back as Illinois sort of went. And he's from Philadelphia. And they go back to the 1600s. They don't go back to the late 1700s. It's just a matter of perception, but trying to consciously realize how long a period of time 500 years is, or 600 years. It's really beyond our concepts in America.
Now, don't misunderstand the fact that the Jewish calendar has not even reached the year 6,000. Judaism as a whole, and Jewish people as a whole, do not necessarily believe that the Earth has only been around some 5,000 or 6,000 years. That's just the way in which this calendar was originally set up, but that is not. If you're going to ask, does Judaism teach that creation occurred some 5,800 years ago? And as a whole, that's not what Judaism
Not
teaches.
literally, no.
No. So just because we follow the Jewish calendar does not mean that we believe that creation took place that number of years ago. So I don't want to leave that as a misunderstanding. Okay, we've gone probably as far as TikTok, yeah. All right, any questions on our rumbling through the millennial reign and what it looks like or what we know about it? All right, then we are done for this evening.
Dun, dun, dun.
Stay tuned. There's the possibility we'll be moving Stump the Stars to just a monthly get-together rather than every couple of weeks.
Do we know when we're meeting next month? Yeah, right in the middle of April, you know, it's past.
Yeah, things get really
complicated.
Yeah. And you know, very, very soon we'll be on Purim next weekend. And then April gets pretty stacked. I think we were originally scheduled to meet the 12th of April.
Could be. Passover begins that night. Wait, The 12th, the evening of the 12th, that's when Passover begins.
Here's a,
See,
oh, wait a second.
I can read
I'm not sure because of the way this is set
the
up,
way it's set up.
whether the first night of Passover is the 13th.
I think the first night is going to be that Saturday evening.
It could very well be. Hang on a
We
second.
will double check that.
Well, yes.
And for what it's worth, Easter, which does not correlate with Passover and the Jewish calendar, Easter is like the latest I've ever seen it in my whole life, which is April 20th. That's so late. And Passover is late too. So, you know, calendars, they're complicated. And yet they're so important in a lot of places. I don't know what he's doing. He went to his office once again to get something very important, I'm sure. He's going to look at a Jewish calendar, I predict. Okay. I did not know I was opening a can of worms. Worms are fine, just don't eat them.
And the pretty ones.
They're for fish. And birds, but not for us. Oh, I hear him.
Okay, yes. Saturday is the first night of Passover, so we're not doing it the 12th.
Yeah, so let's not be doing it at night. We're all busy.
All right. The only one that's scheduled in April right now is April the 26th. The question will be whether we'll have,
We can have the 5th or the 26th,
um,
or we'll get back to them.
we'll get back to them. And
Okay.
there may not be another one in March then.
Okay.
So stay tuned. We'll keep you posted.
No, we're busy. Everyone's busy and important, including us. So
All right.
you get to pray now.
Yes, I
I
get.
pray at the beginning.
Yes. Thank you, Father, for this time that we've had together to just kick around some ideas, to talk about some stuff that's related to our lives and the lives of those around us. And also to consider the lives of those who've gone before us. Pray that all of this would impact our lives. So as we walk hand in hand with you, others will recognize that there is a difference to the way in which we live, and they'll be attracted to that and will raise questions about how they can be part of that. So give us clarity in communicating, as well as lives that are clearly demonstrating who you are and how people can be part of your family. For this, we're grateful because of Yeshua, our Messiah. Amen. And thank you for your attention and for your patience.
Sablanut. In Hebrew, sablanut.
And Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.